The Many Facets of Cancer Survivorship for Patients with Olfactory Neuroblastoma, Olfactory Neuroblastoma Community Conference Series, June 2021.
We're very honored tonight to have Dr. Kim Pierce and Dr. Mary Eve Brown who are joining us. Dr. Pierce is the founder of the Johns Hopkins Primary Care Cancer Survivorship Clinic, and Dr. Brown is a dietitian with specific board training in cancer-related nutrition. So we've put together this series to really focus more on topics related to survivorship, and that's kind of the goal of these. And so tonight we're going to have both of them give presentations on cancer survivorship and nutrition topics. And then after their presentations are done, if you can hold questions until the end, and then after they're done, we'll have some time for some questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Pierce and Dr. Brown, and take it away.
Great, thank you, Niall. I just want to make sure can everyone see my slide? Is it in slide format right now?
Actually, I see yours in, it's like a presenter format. I can see your slide and your next slide.
Okay, let me switch that. Okay, how's that? We're in presenter mode?
It didn't change.
You're seeing split?
Yeah, I still see a split screen. Oh, there goes.
Okay. So you have a split screen or you have the full slide?
We just have the full slide now.
Okay, great. All right, great. So, well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And Mary Eve is going to be speaking with me on several topics. As Niall alluded to, I am a primary care provider. I'm an internist at Johns Hopkins, and I've had an interest for more than 20 years in cancer survivorship, and started with breast cancer initially, but we've developed a group of primary care physicians that take care of all type of cancer survivors. And so we see a lot of themes that run through cancer survivorship care, and kind of wanted to hit on some of those, and then we could take questions to speak to some specifics if you'd like. So I always like to present with this. This was a 3-page newspaper article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago, outlining the future of healthcare and saying you've survived cancer, what happens now? And I think this speaks to the success of the medical care that we have given towards cancer. That the success is that we now have many patients living that have survived their cancer, and we're realizing that there are implications of having been treated for cancer in many different realms, and we're needing to train our workforce to understand what those are and help educate our patients and have our patients educate us on the different domains of that. I also like to show this slide. These are numbers for the United States, and I know we might have other international participants here, but speaking numbers for the United States, this is a graph showing the estimate of cancer survivors of all likes, with the exception of superficial skin cancer, the number of cancer survivors projected through 2040. And you can see it's in the 26 million range. At this time, there's estimated 17 million cancer survivors in the United States. And the thing I like about this slide is it's very telegraphic. And the green, purple, and light blue are patients 65 and above that are considered cancer survivors. And the importance of that for me as an internist is there are other medical conditions that we need to be thinking about as our patients get older, and that we can't separate those out from their diagnosis of cancer. And there's an interplay between those comorbid conditions and their cancer. And so I don't want us to silo cancer out from their entire health care. I think that's really important. It's also important to see that the numbers are rising. So these are the buckets that I think about when I think about survivorship care. First off, cancer surveillance and screening. So remember, cancer surveillance is the the patients that have been diagnosed with the cancer, and we're going to follow them closely either with examinations or imaging to see if their cancer has come back. That's surveillance. That is different than cancer screening. Cancer screening is looking for a primary cancer, separate than the one cancer that's already been identified. And that's things like colon cancer screening or breast cancer screening with mammography or skin cancer screening or pap smears and the like. And so they're very different things, but they're both equally important when we think about survivorship care. The second bucket is cancer treatment-related side effects, and I'm sure you all could educate me on some of your experiences with this tumor. But there are side effects related to your treatment at the time of your surgery or your radiation or potentially chemotherapy, and then there are side effects that are latent, come later because of the radiation that you've been exposed to at the time of treatment. There's then your non-cancer health issues, and those are some of the things I alluded to in the last slide, the comorbidities, the diabetes or hypertension or bone issues that really someone needs to be following and that we want to make sure don't fall through the cracks when we're thinking about cancer therapy. The fourth bucket, and this is where Mary Eve is going to talk with us for a bit, is prevention, health promotion. And so that's prevention of a lot of things. That's prevention of cancer, but other medical conditions, and health promotion. And a big chunk of that is what you eat and what you do. And then finally, the psychosocial well-being. And that's not just mental health. And I would also say it's important to realize that these buckets overlap in many ways. So they don't function independently. The cancer treatment impacts number 4 and number 5 and vice versa, and number 3 and number 2. And so when we talk about one, we always have to think about it in the context of the other. So this is my super simplified version of health promotion, but I'm going to turn it over now to Mary Eve. I'm going to stop sharing, and she's going to talk to us a little bit more about health promotion.
Sorry. So hi, I'm Mary Eve. I am a licensed registered oncology dietitian. And tonight what I'm going to be sharing with you guys is what is a survivorship diet? What does it look like? Another word for a survivorship diet can be a prevention diet. And just as Kim was saying, is that, we're not only just looking at our cancer journey, but now as a survivor, I need to make sure that all the other health concerns are also taken care of. And the great thing about this prevention diet or survivorship diet, it all has the same root. So it's not only cancer preventative, but it's hypertensive preventative, it's vascular disease preventative, it's obesity preventative. So the great news is that you only need to really follow one basic principle of eating. And I am rooted in science, so I have to look to science to see what this diet should look like. And so this diet is actually promoted by major health organizations, my Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the American Institute of Cancer Research, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, the American Cancer Society, and it's also supported by the last dietary guidelines for Americans. So this is kind of it in a nutshell. We're going to go into it a little bit more in depth. And I also wanted to give you guys some, how do I do this? Like, how do I incorporate these things into my diet? So I have some fun ways that we can do this. So in the beginning, we need to be eating from the planet. It's a plant-based diet. That doesn't mean that you don't eat animal. It just means the majority of what you eat is plant. So it's going to be rich in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, some healthy fats, plant-based proteins, or if you do animal-based proteins, that they're the leanest that they can be. And then it's non-fat and low-fat dairy. And then I'm going to kind of go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. The key with vegetables is variety. I get asked probably every day, what's the one thing I should eat every day? I'm eating kale every day. Is that what I should be doing? You really want to look to the rainbow. Each different color of a vegetable gives you a different phytonutrient. And a phytonutrient is an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory health property. So it's very healthy for us to get a variety of these in, because things that are red, with lycopene, are different than things that are purple, that are different than things that are orange, dark green, and white. So each one of these colors is a different cancer fighter, a different anti-inflammatory agent. I also like to think of herbs. Herbs are hugely concentrated sources of phytochemicals, and they're really super easy to grow. All you need is a sunny place. I do mine in pots on my deck because I'm not a great gardener, but I can grow herbs in a pot. And I love throwing them in all kinds of different things. So last night I decided to roast some green beans, and I'm like, oh, I have some oregano. and I have some parsley. So I trimmed a bunch of oregano and a bunch of parsley, and I threw it in with the green beans, olive oil, roasted them. Fantastic. I throw them in salads all the time. Like I'll just throw basil into a salad, but think of herbs only, not as just a flavoring enhancer, but also as a cancer fighter. So what are things that are red? Tomatoes, watermelon, red peppers, raspberries, pomegranate. And tomatoes, when you cook them with some olive oil, it releases the lycopene a little bit easier for the body to digest them. And when you're having these vegetables, you want some raw and some partially cooked. And tomatoes are one that I would cook in olive oil. I have a picture coming up in a bit, what I did the other day. Okay, orange, yellow, carrots, pumpkin, squash, sweet potatoes, mangoes, papayas, blue, purple, figs, purple cabbage, blueberries, blackberries, eggplant, yellow, green, asparagus, collard greens, spinach, winter squash. So how can I get these veggies in? And I have people say, I had a patient the other day. She's like, I don't eat any vegetables. And I'm like, really? You don't? She goes, no, not one. And I'm like, why? And she goes, well, my mother wasn't a great cook. Everything was overly cooked. It was mushy. It didn't have any taste to it. So I say, if you're a person who has said, I don't like vegetables, change it up how you're preparing them. So grilling them or roasting them. And I try to do them like in large batches, and I'll try to get at least like 4 different colors of things going on. So like carrot and tomato and beets and leek and broccoli, you can roast them all together, or parsnips or red cabbage or Brussels sprouts or cauliflower. I do big patches of them that keep them in the fridge, and then you can use them during the week. So you could add them into an omelet with an egg, add them on top of a sandwich, top a sweet potato with something. You can use them as a snack. Sometimes I'll just grill. I did broccoli the other day, and that was my afternoon snack. Add them to salads, or you can even blend them into soups. Okay, the key with vegetables, you really want to try to eat in season. When you eat in season, you're eating closer to home. Can you go to a farmer's market? I belong to a CSA. Can I do a cooperative with a farm in my area? That way I'm getting them harvested and on my table in the shortest period of time. If you're eating something that's grown in a different season, you're getting it from some other part of the world. And it was harvested, and it takes a long time to get to me, and it sits in my grocery store. And all that processing, you're losing nutrition. So sometimes I use the freezer section. If there's something, not in season, but it's something that I want to do, the freezer section is a great place to look to find vegetables. They are harvested and processed in a very short period of time, and the nutrition is locked in the freezing package. I pickle things a lot. If I have something that's coming to the end, looks like it's going to go on me, I'll quick pickle it, and then that lasts for a couple of weeks in my fridge. Think about how I can add them in. Where can I put a veggie in here? I'm doing this. Could I put a veggie in there in there somewhere? We talked about herbs. Yeah, could I add zucchini to lasagna? Can I put roasted tomatoes and spaghetti squash? Can I do some veggie chips? Salsas are another great way to get veggies in. So this is what I was saying. So I have beets there, and I have some cucumbers, and I had some tomatoes that were kind of getting ready to go. So I pickled everything. I pickled the beets, I pickled the cucumbers, and then I oven roasted the tomatoes. So it's just thinking of them in a different way. Here's even more ideas. You can bake with them. Can I make a carrot cake? Can I make a zucchini bread? Can I make a pumpkin bread? Add them to sauces. Can I put mushrooms in my tomato sauce? Can I add pumpkin to my soup? And pumpkin is really nice in a lot of savory soups. I add a lot to chili. So if I do a bean chili, sometimes I'll add some pumpkin in. You can make pestos out of things, soups, fries. These green beans I did, they kind of ended up being like a crisp fry. Can I add it on top of pizza? Can I put a salad on top of my pizza? Can I put arugula or mixed greens or spinach on top of my pizza? We're going to talk about that. Okay, grains. So the thing about unprocessed grains, we always think about the fiber, but we don't think about the other nutrients that are also in unprocessed grains. So an unprocessed grain means that it's intact. It has the germ, it has the seed, it has its coating. And that all has also phytonutrients in it. It has flavonoids and lignins. There's also minerals, magnesium and iron and selenium, also rich in vitamins, thiamine, niacin, and folate. So it's not just all about the fiber. All of these are also important for our overall health. What are whole grains? Brown rice, and corn, oatmeal, quinoa. There's farro, whole rye, whole wheat, wild rice. And some ideas for those is, can I mix it into a salad? I make usually just in the holiday time, it's a wild rice and cranberry salad. Can I make a corn and bean salad? I had that one there, dried cranberries and the wild rice. Quinoa, can I make that into a salad, like a Greek salad with some cucumbers and red peppers, maybe some red onions and some chickpeas? Can I substitute, if I'm making something, can I put a whole grain product into it? So can I do half of a regular flour and half of a whole wheat flour? My mother used to do this, making meatloaf. She would use oatmeal, and I do that today. I tend to do it with ground turkey. Or there's also pastas that are also made from grains. So there's chickpea, quinoa pasta, and bean pastas. So I mentioned this healthy fat. So we used to think that a low-fat or non-fat diet was really a healthy thing for us. And then we learned that not so much. These fats are important for our overall health. And the one thing that we learned is that omega-3s are really a powerful anti-inflammatory to our bodies. And so some ways to get those on are to use nuts. They're good in protein, so they can be a plant-based protein. They also are good in vitamins and minerals and omega-3s. Seeds, protein, vitamin, minerals, fiber, and omega-3s again. And then the vegetable oils, canola, olive, flax. There's also avocado oil, walnut, grapeseed. I didn't list them all there. And then avocados. So fun ideas to get these healthy fats in. And also, when you add a fat to a meal, it also helps with satiety, which means it lets you feel fuller longer. So it can help with weight. So breakfast, can I add nuts or seeds to yogurt? Can I do a nut butter on toast, almond butter or cashew butter or peanut butter? Can I put nuts or seeds into oatmeal or cream of wheat, a hot cereal, or on a cold cereal? Can I add nuts or seeds to a salad? Pumpkin seeds, on my salad, or sunflower seeds on my salad. Can I put pecans or almonds on steamed vegetables? Almonds go really nice with green beans. Can I add cashews to stir fry? Can I use pine nuts in a coleslaw? Sometimes I put sunflower seeds in my coleslaw. And then in baked goods, can I add some nuts into a baked good? So I talked about this kind of a more plant-based diet. So we looked at trying to do more plant-based proteins. So the legumes, which are beans and lentils and peas and peanuts, and then tree nuts, seeds, and whole grains. Those are our sources of plant-based proteins. So when I'm looking at my week, can I kind of slip in a vegetarian-based meal one time and use one of these? Can I do, a chili or a soup or that has more beans in it and no meat in it? Can I add a salad with lentils and nuts and seeds? So I'm getting the protein, but I'm getting it in a plant-based form. So I'm decreasing overall my animal intake. So if you are looking to do animal protein, you really want to look to fatty fish. So fatty fish, again, are high in omega-3s, and it's recommended try to get them twice a week. Salmon, sardines, tuna, and herring. If I'm going to do poultry, I'm going to do white meat poultry over dark meat poultry, and then I'm going to try to limit my total red meat intake. Dairy. A lot of people tell me, dairy is bad for cancer. And I'm like, no, it's actually protective. So you do want to get non-fat and low-fat dairy. You also want to get the dairy to protect your bone health, because now as we get older, we need to worry about osteoporosis and osteopenia. So you really want to do non-fat yogurt, skim milk, non-fat cottage cheese, part skim ricotta, part skim mozzarella. So you want to try to get as low fat or as non-fat to decrease the saturated fat in the diet. This is what your plate should look like. If you take your plate and cut it in half is vegetable with a little bit of fruit. You cut the other part in a quarter. It's some type of whole grain, and then some type of healthy protein. And I'm going to say something funny so our plates are getting bigger. When, there used to be 9-inch plates. That was the standard. It's now 12 to 14-inch plates are our standard. And that actually then leads to, this whole epidemic of obesity. Our portions are getting larger. So when I'm talking about this, when you do that vegetable, that's the lower calorie part of this. So it really does help control calories at the same time. Supplementation. So food, not supplements, is the best way to get our vitamins and minerals. There's no evidence as of today that dietary supplements provide any kind of anti-cancer benefit at all. And then, this is going to go into other stuff that we're not going to talk about. These are some resources, some reputable websites to go on to read about nutrition and cancer and health. These are the ones that I think are the safest for us to use. So if it came from a plant, eat it. If it's made in a plant, don't.
Great. Thank you, Mary Eve. So we're going to try to do the switch here again, and hopefully we have more success. If you want to stop sharing your slides there for a moment. Back together there. Okay, so thank you, Mary. That was really helpful. And again, this is my very dumbed down view of all of that is exercise, lots of colorful foods, and no smoking. Summed up as eating a nutrient-dense plant-based diet, tobacco cessation, and I can't stress that enough. And it's gotten a red highlight here because particularly for any tumors in the head and neck region, tobacco cessation is an absolute necessity. Maintaining a healthy weight, minimizing alcohol consumption, and staying physically active. So if you could do those 5 things, you'd be far ahead of the game for cancer survivorship. Staying in the kind of the health promotion realm, I just want to mention vaccinations for a moment. I get a lot of questions about what vaccine should I get after having cancer. They're very similar to those that you should get if you haven't had cancer. Flu shot, COVID vaccine, which I'm really hopeful that all of you have been able to obtain and have completed your series. Shingles, or the Shingrix vaccines indicated for those over the age of 50. Tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis, or Tdap, is a one-time dose and then a 10-year boost for regular tetanus. We encourage HPV vaccination for those up to age 45. And then there are a couple others probably worth mentioning. The pneumococcal vaccination, or the pneumonia, we typically give to those age 65 and above. But for individuals under 65 with certain health conditions, it's indicated, and particularly those that have had surgeries where the CSF may have been invaded, or they're potentially leak with the CSF. Both pneumococcal vaccinations are indicated, in particular the Prevnar 13. So I just raised these to make sure you have a conversation with someone about these vaccines. Hepatitis A and B are also indicated for certain conditions, particularly hepatitis B if you have diabetes. And then again, there are other ones if there's other immunocompromising situations. So going back to our buckets of cancer survivorship, I highlight here next sort of cancer treatment related side effects and psychosocial well-being, because often they are very intimately related. As mentioned when we started this, I am part of a clinic that we run for primary care for cancer survivorship, and we did a needs assessment early on for about 180 of our patients. Many were breast cancer and colorectal, but I think this is relevant to all cancer types. And we asked about emotional and physical effect concerns and obtain the prevalence and the intensity of those concerns. And not surprising, the emotional need that was most prevalent was the fear of recurrent. That was ranked the highest. And there's been many studies across all cancer types suggesting that the fear of recurrence is very high for any individual having cancer. And I suspect that's not a shock to anyone. But that can also be seen in caregivers. There's also been studies that suggest that caregivers share this same fear of recurrence for the patient and has impact on those relationships. The physical effect most commonly reported was fatigue, followed by weight changes. But fatigue, again, is somewhat ubiquitous sometimes in cancer therapy. So I just want to take a moment and talk about cancer-related fatigue, because this often doesn't go away immediately after therapy is completed. And for those of you that are further out from your treatment, may still be relevant. So I always like to think about it. It's a large bucket. And when somebody comes to me saying they're fatigued and they've just had their cancer therapy or they're in it, or even if they're a bit out from it, we kind of march through all the different potential etiologies. So first I go through medical issues. Common things are common, diabetes, thyroid disease, anemia, bread and butter internal medicine I like to think through. Then there's obviously cancer treatment related side effects, and radiation therapy can have a very prolonged impact on fatigue, surprisingly so. I think patients are somewhat surprised by that often, that the fatigue from radiation can last much longer than the therapy itself. Medications can impact energy levels, and so I always like to run through what medications may be new. Some are obviously necessary, and we just work through that, but it's worth running the list. Sleep disturbances are very common and related to cancer, and insomnia is by far the most common. And I think through COVID, probably even those of us without cancer have appreciated the impact of insomnia. And I think it's really important to talk about sleep habits. So when patients go through therapy, have other stressors, get tired, often take very long naps during the day, and that can really disrupt sleep cycles. So the idea of napping for an hour at a time is really a no-no, and we encourage people to take naps no longer than 20 to 25 minutes so that you don't go into a full REM cycle and then disrupt your sleep cycle at night. There's some other sleep hygiene recommendations that we could talk about if that's of interest, but includes keeping regular sleep cycles, not having stimulants before bedtime, minimizing alcohol use, staying away from blue light, which are all those cell phones and computers and all those things that we use way up till sleep. Those really disrupt your circadian cycles. And then finally, mood disorders. I think it's really important to think about and screen and discuss the potential for anxiety and depression in its impact on fatigue, and because we would treat that differently than some of these other things. So if we screen for some of those other etiologies and we really think, hey, it's related to the therapy you have and there's not an acute treatment, what do we do about it? Well, I would say when you look at the literature, the best literature on this, hands down, is exercise, 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 which is a hard message to tell patients when they're coming in and telling you they're fatigued. But there is study after study to support the benefit of exercise in reducing fatigue levels. And well-done studies. And exercise can be anything. It is from running to swimming to biking to Tai Chi to yoga to anything. It improves cancer-related fatigue. So that's the starting point. There are other psychosocial interventions that may be beneficial, and some of those are very simple. So the idea of energy conservation, sort of knowing what you can get done in a day and prioritizing what you're going to do up front. Using a diary to get more structuring of your daily schedule has been found to be beneficial. In fact, just discussing the impact of fatigue on your life has been beneficial to reducing the level of fatigue people feel. So seminars similar to this, where groups can discuss the impact of cancer and its relationship to fatigue, is important. And there are a few small, very small studies regarding acupuncture and its benefit in reducing fatigue. So what I advise people is probably not going to hurt you. It may benefit you. We can debate how that works, but it's a consideration. And then finally, sleep hygiene, as I mentioned before. So what exercise is recommended? Well, the American Cancer Society does have guidelines on how much exercise you should get if you've had cancer. And again, realizing that this has to be taken in the context of who you are as an individual. But the guidelines do exist. And this past year, 2020, they revised them to say more is better. My take on that is more is better, but do whatever you can do. And so the basement level recommendation is 150 minutes of exercise a week. So that's 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, moderate intensity, but more is better. Additionally, they recommend 2 days at least of muscle strengthening. So that doesn't mean super heavy weights. That just means simple, toning exercises. You can do it 10 minutes at a time and individualize your pace. So again, people say, how much should I do? More is better. Do what you can do. So I found this study, this is pertaining sort of head and neck. I couldn't find anything specific to what we were discussing today, but this is from a study done on 158 patients. It was a randomized controlled study that had head and neck cancer that were undergoing chemotherapy and radiation. And they wanted to evaluate the effectiveness of an exercise-based rehab on several primary outcomes, which included quality of life, their endurance, which they measured as a 6-minute walk distance, and then the impact of fatigue. And so the control group for this, they did allow to exercise. They exercised 3 times a day in 10-minute intervals, 5 days a week, so a reasonable amount. But the intervention group, they had to do 20 minutes a day for moderate intensive exercise for 5 days a week. And at week 3, 7, and 11 are these time points. Those that did more intensive exercise had better conditioning. Not shocking, but they're purposefully exercising that improved. Additionally, on surveys, their quality of life was better, and their fatigue did not worsen with exercise compared to the control group. So again, this study's been replicated in lots of different disease states. Exercise improves lots of different outcomes. So just a mention on depression and anxiety. I put these here in big, bold colors. It's important to realize we all experience some of these symptoms at points in time. Depression and anxiety is when you've had persistence of several of the symptoms over a couple of weeks that are really impacting your life. And I think it's really important to talk to your healthcare provider about that. There's no shame in bringing this up and making sure they're treated appropriately. And treatment doesn't always have to immediately go to medications. It doesn't have to go to pharmacotherapy. It can start with, therapy of different sorts, but at least to have somebody evaluating and deciding what would be appropriate therapy. So these meet criteria of depression and anxiety, which I will make a distinction to cancer-related distress. So cancer-related distress differs from anxiety, DSM anxiety, in that cancer-related distress is the anxiety that goes with it is not across all domains of your life. It's based on a consequence of living with a heightened awareness of the uncertainties of life, but the anxiety is not generalizable to everything else. It's sort of a response to what has occurred regarding your cancer. And it's, again, top of the line is fear of recurrence. It's being hypervigilant about new or persistent symptoms, having a heightened concern about family and finances, stress from managing health needs, changes in self-perception and body image, and an increased awareness of vulnerability. And I think some of us would say, look, those are very normal responses to having gone through what is probably a pretty traumatic event in having cancer and the therapy related to that. And so it is different, but I think it's important to acknowledge this. I will also say caregivers of patients that have cancer often experience the same exact thing. And so communicating that and normalizing that is important. I'll briefly just comment on sexual health because it's often impacted from cancer therapy and the diagnosis of cancer for a multitude of reasons. There's the psychological component, there's the change in body image, then there's also the obvious physical changes that can occur, particularly when you have tumors like the one we're discussing today, where hormonal levels could be impacted and there could be real changes to libido. Sexual health can take on different forms. It's not just intercourse, it can be intimacy and having open discussions with partner and being amenable to talking with your physician or a sexual health counselor about how to address some of these challenges and think about other alternatives is important. I think it's something we probably don't discuss enough. It takes the back burner because of the intensity of thinking about cancer and treating cancer, but it really impacts quality of life for many patients. And then just, sort of the very big bucket of late effects of treatment and or other medical conditions patient happens. So the late effects of treatment are from the impact of surgery, whether it impacts smell or nasal issues or even disfigurement for some patients, radiation side effects, and then for a small subset, chemotherapy side effects, and that those can be wide-ranging. Neuropathy can potentially be one of those. And again, we could talk about some of those issues in detail if you'd like. And then wearing my internal medicine hat, is the importance of addressing other medical conditions because, again, things like diabetes, heart health, bone health, intimately intertwined with health and ultimate outcomes and how patients do long term are really important. Heart health is a big bucket, right? That's hypertension, that's cholesterol, that's weight. That also has impact on vascular disease. And vascular disease is not just your heart, it's also the carotids in your neck and in your brain, and the vessels in your brain. And so all of those things that we think about healthy heart are important for all the other blood vessels in your body. And particularly when we talk about head and neck kinds of things, those are the same. It's the same impact. And so glucose and diabetes control has an impact on that. And so we want to think about those. Bone health is important as women get older, but it's also important as men get older, particularly men who have low testosterone levels, which can happen for a host of reasons. And we want to think about that in the context of some of the things that Mary Eve mentioned, making sure you're getting enough calcium, vitamin D is important, and then being screened for bone health as you get older with bone density. And finally, again, I'm wearing my internal medicine hat here. The healthcare system functions a little bit siloed, and our goal here today is to try to make it more of a continuum. And so that while you are getting phenomenal care through your surgeons and radiation oncologists and medical oncologists, the primary care provider should be part of your team. He or she is part of your team. And so I think that communication is really important. At Hopkins, we're very fortunate to have an electronic health record that we can all share information. But for those of you that might have your primary care provider outside of Johns Hopkins, communication is really important. And so these are the things that I really need to know when I see a patient that's had cancer and that I might not have access to their records is, who are your medical providers? Who are all the players in the game? It's important to keep that in one place. What are the specifics about your cancer diagnosis and the treatment? What side effects did you have during active treatment or that you're continuing to have? A lot of things we're talking about today. And then who's going to be doing what? And by that, I mean, who's going to be following up what? And I think sometimes the lanes are more clean, like who's going to be doing the surveillance screening and who's going to be checking the blood pressure and monitoring glucose. Sometimes they get a little bit blurred. So I think making sure as a patient that you are empowered to say, ask your providers that, who's doing what, so it's a clear path forward.
U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, cancer.gov/mypart, 1-800-4-CANCER. Produced September 2021.